Hey, friend, welcome to the Help and Hope podcast of Mark Inc. Ministries. My name is Chuck Betters, and I am the founder of Mark Inc. Ministries. And we have a very special program for you today. I know you're going to be blessed by it. We have with us a good friend, former board member, Doug MacGray, who is going to share with us some thoughts about legacy giving. Doug, the other day I was reading in Matthew chapter 25. And in that passage there, we call it the parable of the talents, the parable of the bags of gold. God distributes treasures to 3 different people. 10 bags of gold, 2 bags of gold, 1 bag of gold. The passage goes on to reveal how after the course of time, the owner comes back to claim what he's given to the 3 individuals. The guy with 10 bags of gold has doubled his investment. He presents 20 bags of gold. Well done, good and faithful servant. The father says, you've been faithful over a little. I will make you ruler over much. In the second case, the one who was given less treasure, but proportionately comes back and doubles it, the same commendation is given to him. But when we get to the third guy, an interesting twist takes place in Matthew 25. The man who received 2 bags of gold came and said, Master, you entrusted me with 2. I have gained 2 more. Again, well done, good and faithful servant. Then the man who had received 1 bag of gold came, Master, I knew that you are a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid and went out and hid your gold in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you. His master replied, now listen to this. His master replied, you wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. Well then, you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers, so that when I returned, I would have received it back with interest. And instead of a commendation, there's a condemnation. Doug, I was reading that passage, and I'm thinking, I am 77 years old, and I know God is going to call me to account with what he's blessed me with. Over the years, what I've accumulated or failed to accumulate, the investments that I've made with good returns, the investments that I made with bad returns. You are my investment wealth manager. I have come to Stonecrop for a reason. And one of those reasons I think you have outlined beautifully in a previous video that will link to this podcast, where you talk about a social conscience in investing. So, Doug, I want to first of all thank you for coming on. Thank you for the podcast. But I want to ask you, why do you support Mark Inc. Ministries?
Well, thank you so much for having me on. It's a real privilege to anytime to be with you, Chuck. Mark Inc. became near and dear to my heart many years ago because I certainly resonated with the story that started it when you lost your 16-year-old son. When I was a young child, I lost my 16-year-old brother and had really wrestled with God for a period of about 10 years or more, actually, before I actually came to faith. And so when I saw that in a very transparent way, Mark Inc. was using that horrific event that happened, that tragedy, and the victory that came from it, to try to reach others that are in some of the darkest and most difficult circumstances. And knowing that I had to go through a long period of time wrestling with God to get to that, I thought this is a ministry that I want to be involved with.
And involved you have been. What is legacy giving, Doug? What are some of the ways in which people can give beyond their life, beyond their scale of blessing?
Right. Well, we love legacy giving and we love talking about it at Stonecrop, because it really gets people to have a vision beyond what they might have done generally during their lives. People of the Christian faith tend to get a vision for tithing, which we, of course, encourage and get excited about when people catch that vision and decide, they want to be generous. And then people that go beyond that. But that is essentially giving out of your lifetime earnings, your income. But then when you start thinking, okay, God is blessing me with some financial wealth, what do I want to do with that either today or someday? In other words, giving out of my net worth as opposed to giving out of my income. So legacy giving to us is there are all sorts of ways. We can talk about the manners, but legacy giving is really thinking about this wealth that I am using now to keep myself potentially financially independent, or that I'm using for other purposes, whatever's left when I pass away, or maybe whatever's excess now, what can I do with that will extend beyond my lifetime to further the kingdom in ways that, again, will extend beyond the day after my days are done.
Do you have to be an old person to be considering legacy giving? What about young people?
You do not have to be old. One thing that happened to me, I used to practice law and I used to do wills, and I remember doing a seminar at a very at a church of people that did not have a lot of wealth, and I did a seminar, and then they said, "Well, can you actually draft wills for us?" And so I actually drafted wills for probably a dozen or so people in that church. And all of them were giving a portion of, and these were all young people, all of them designated 10% or some portion of their ultimate wealth after they passed away to the church. And when I added it all up, even though these people were all 20s, 30s, there might have been one couple that might have been 40, it was a substantial number. And so young people can think about it both with their will, but also in a variety of other ways. Because, as you were, Chuck, you were saying, you're 77. So I'm thinking about it. Well, none of us knows how long we have on this planet before the Lord takes us. And so it's an appropriate thing to be thinking about at any time. Young people in particular tend to have a greater part of their ultimate wealth often in a term life insurance policy. So what ultimately is going to happen with that? Of course, you want to take care of your family and your children, but is there excess there? And so there are a number of things that young people can be thinking about as well.
So one way to give is in your will, to actually designate a certain percentage.
Yes, and one of the struggles we have, even with our clients who are Christians, is that when we get to talking to them about their estate plan and their wills in particular, there doesn't seem to be an impulse to leave money to the kingdom. A lot of people will just come flat out and respond, I've done that during my lifetime. This is all going to my children. And we want people to bless their children in the next generations. Absolutely, that's an appropriate thing to do with wealth. But we also get a little frustrated that people don't think of that more often. And so, yes, you can leave a percentage. You can say, I want to leave 10% of my estate to such and such charity. And so, yeah, that's a very, very simple and probably that is the simplest thing to do and the one that creates the most legacy giving. And so that one simple thing can be a very, very important step to take.
Doug, one of the things that I've recently learned is that the pension and the investment accounts that I have, there's a certain required minimum distribution after a certain age. We call it the RMD. Talk to me about the RMD.
Yes, RMDs have been around, required minimum distributions, for a long time. If you have a 401k or a 403b or an IRA, then that money grows tax deferred for many years potentially. But then when you hit a certain age, and the age used to be 70 and a half, and it went up to 73, and it's actually going up to 75. So once you get to one of those ages, you are required, using an IRS table, to take a certain amount out as a distribution, and you have to move that from your IRA or whatever account it's in into a regular account. And by doing that, you're creating income. So if you take $10,000 out, if that's your RMD, then you have to report $10,000 in income and get taxed on that. And so that's what the RMDs are. You do have the option now of up to $100,000 a year within those RMDs to take what's called a QCD, a qualified charitable distribution. So if you decide your RMD is $38,000, you can take that entire 38 as a qualified charitable distribution, have it go directly to a charity, and that will not count as income for that year.
That would save you quite a bit in taxes, I would assume.
Yes.
How do I give stock to a charitable organization?
Yeah, this stock, mutual funds, exchange traded funds, they are pretty simple to give to a charity. And oftentimes they're the best thing to give to a charity. Because if you think about it, what a lot of people do is they invest money. And say you're investing it in a stock portfolio or mutual funds or things like that. And then they're also earning income, and they take some money from their paycheck and give it to charity. Well, that money from your paycheck has already been taxed. So you're giving the net amount out of your pay and paying it there. But if you have a stock that was purchased 5-10 years ago and it's doubled in value over that period of time, and let's just say it's worth $10,000, now you bought it at $5,000. If you sell that and then say, I want to give $10,000 to charity, you sell the $10,000 in stock, you give it to charity. Well, now you have to pay the capital gains tax. Well, instead of doing that, instead of giving the charity cash, take the stock and give it directly to the charity, and that capital gains tax is completely avoided. So it allows you to kind of ratchet up how much money you have available to give to the charity. And most charities are set up so that they can actually accept it. It has to go from your brokerage account directly to the charity's account. And almost every charity is set up to do that. If not, then it's a pretty simple thing to set up.
Now, I'm not sure I fully understand what a charitable remainder trust is. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. A charitable remainder trust is an irrevocable trust. In other words, when you set it up, you can't change your mind. You might be able to change a few of the terms, but essentially with a charitable remainder trust, you are taking some money. So again, let's focus on a round number, $100,000. And you put that into a charitable remainder trust. What now happens is that when you pass away, that whatever's left in that trust will go to the charity that you have chosen. In the meantime, you get to draw income from that trust. So let's say you put $100,000 and you say, I'm going to get 5% every year. You will get 5% every year from that trust based upon how much is in it. So if you invest the money in that trust and it grows faster than 5%, the amount you get every year will be higher. You can take 3%, you can take 6%, maybe 7%, depends on the table. There is a cap that moves every year. And it depends too on how young or old you are. So there are a lot of moving pieces, so you have to get those figured out. But essentially, whatever's left over goes to the charity. And if you give $100,000, then the future value of that gift has to be worth at least 10%. So essentially, if you set it up right, then you'll be able to put $100,000 in a trust, draw income from it, and get a $10,000 charitable deduction right away. And again, depending on how you set up the trust, that deduction could be even higher.
Now, would that be something that elderly people would be more prone to do than younger people?
Well, yeah, depends on what you mean by elderly, but probably not people in their 20s and 30s, but people who are probably retired, put it that way. And because this can be a building block of their retirement. In other words, say, I'm going to take this $100,000 and create an income stream for myself. And when I pass away, I don't need that money anymore. So it's going to go to the charity. And so, yeah, it is something that generally fits kind of within the overall, okay, I'm going to get this in Social Security. I'm going to get this from maybe a small pension. And, I might do a little bit of consulting in retirement, whatever. You kind of add up all of those income streams and say, I'd love a little bit more income. So I'm going to create a charitable trust that will kind of add a little bit more. So it is often a retirement planning vehicle for sure.
Now, Doug, let's suppose a Mark Inc. supporter is sitting in front of you right now, seeking your wisdom on how to give to Mark Inc. Ministries with one or more of these various tools that we've talked about. But then they raise this question. They say, what if 10 years from now, or 20 years from now, when I'm no longer here, and I've invested this money into this ministry that I believe is solid and evangelical and God-honoring today, but somehow or another over the years, they've gone off the rails. Somehow or another, 10, 15, 20 years from now, the leadership no longer supports the values that I support. Do they have any recourse?
Well, there are some things that can be done and some things that can't. You can't take the money back per se, because once it's given to a charity, it belongs to charity. So it has to stay in a 501c3 type of thing. You can restrict, anytime you give a gift, you can restrict it. And so if, for example, I give a gift to Mark Inc. and say, you can only use this for X. Now, Mark Inc. has to make a decision. Am I okay with that restriction or not? And so if I say, okay, Mark Inc., I'm going to give you money, but you can only put it in an endowment fund, you will know that I can't, Mark Inc. can't use that for just operating expenses for the year. It has to go in an endowment. Similarly, you can create other restrictions and say, this money must go towards a ministry that stands for the following. And if it ever stops standing for the following, then it can no longer be used and will have to go to another charity that stands for those things. And then anyone, including the state and the attorney general, or any, I'm not sure else who has standing, but that now can be challenged if that gift is no longer being used in the way it was initially set up. So those are a couple of things. The other piece to it is that if Mark Inc. is no longer existing as Mark Inc., for example, then that money will be available. It'll have to go to another ministry that is very, very similar. But you can restrict the gift from the get-go, and it's up to Mark Inc. as to whether or not they're going to be okay with that particular restriction. So it's something you can negotiate.
Now, let's suppose you have a client sitting in front of you right now who asks you this question. Doug, I'm retired, and I want to make sure that some of my retirement beyond my death goes to Mark Inc. Ministries. Where do they start?
Well, we always like to start simple and then only get more complicated if it's needed or if it's much more helpful. As a young estate planning attorney, I loved the complicated stuff. And every time I brought it up, people were like, no, it's too complicated. So I always like to start simple. And then, and so the simplest thing to do would be, okay, first tell me about your will. I want to know the entire situation, but the will is the easiest thing to do. But one of the most tax efficient and simple things to do for giving money to Mark Inc. would be to go find out what people have in their IRAs, 401ks too, but let's assume it's all been rolled into IRAs. All of that money that's left in the IRA when you pass away is going to get taxed. Even if there's no estate tax, it's still going to get taxed by income tax because it all has to go through the income tax system. So now if you pass away and leave your money to the next generation, within 10 years, it has to be distributed and taxed. If you leave any of that money directly to Mark Inc., it bypasses the tax. So it's a very tax efficient way. So in other words, you will have put money in when it was your 401k, It didn't get taxed. It actually lowered your taxes when you put it in. It grows tax deferred forever. And now because you're giving it to charity, it doesn't get taxed ever. So that's one of the simplest and most tax efficient things to do, is to say, I'm going to make Mark Inc. Beneficiary of 10%, 25%, whatever, of my IRA. So those would be the two simplest things. Look at your will and maybe make Mark Inc. Either a specific amount. I'm going to give them 10,000, 50,000, 10%, whatever. You can make that very simple, or the IRA. The other simple thing to do is similarly with a life insurance policy. If you have a whole life policy or something that's definitely going to be around your entire life, then you can make Mark Inc. a partial beneficiary, or a full beneficiary. If it's something that your family no longer needs, then you can make it a beneficiary. So those would be the first places I start. And then after that, we would potentially look at, are there trusts you can think about, like a charitable remainder trust or something of that nature, as we kind of go up the complication ladder.
How do people get in touch with you? It sounds to me like somebody would have to set up an appointment with you or one of your advisors to actually walk through the various opportunities that they have to give to Mark Inc. Ministries. How do they do that?
Well, the simplest way would to find us, that's most memorable, is to go right to our website. It's stonecropadvisors.com. That would be the easiest way. And then, or it could just be an email to me, which is my first initial and last name at stonecropadvisors.com. So it would be D as in Douglas, MACGRAY at stonecropadvisors.com. Or our phone number is 610-628-0035.
We'll have all this information on our website for you who are watching this. But Doug, let me get personal just for a moment.
Okay.
You've served on our board. You know our family. We have a great friendship, I believe. You're also our wealth advisor. If you had a client sitting in front of you right now who said, I really like what Mark Inc. Ministries is doing, but I'm not sure that I should make this kind of commitment, why should somebody give, in your opinion, to Mark Inc. Ministries?
Well, this is something we think and talk and write about a lot these days, because legacy giving blesses the next generations. And without going into a lot of detail, I recently did a talk on this, comparing King David's estate plan, believe it or not, he had an estate plan, and King Jehoshaphat's estate plan. They're both men after God's own heart. The generation after King David was incredibly blessed. The generation after King Jehoshaphat was cursed because of their estate plans. So just read about them and you'll see it. But we really want Christians of this generation to bless the next generations with their wealth. And so it requires two things. First of all, is passing along your Christian values to the next generations. While you're alive, you still have an opportunity to do that. So spend time with your grandchildren and your children and your nephews and nieces and pass along those values. But also with your wealth, pass that along in a way that's going to further the kingdom and help the next generations to be blessed. So find those charities that you believe will do that. I believe Mark Inc. is one of those charities. And if someone came in asking me, do you think that's a good idea? I would say yes. But we firmly believe that people need to think through that legacy so that the next generations aren't cursed because they didn't even give it a thought.
Well, that goes hand in hand with Matthew 25. Because when Jesus comes to the third person who buried their treasure rather than investing it, he actually curses them. He actually says, you are a wicked and perverse generation. And, it's difficult because when you start talking about people's money and people's kids, you can find yourself in a whole heap of trouble very quickly. I want to encourage those of you who are watching this to give careful attention to legacy giving. Of course, we want you to give it to Marking Ministries, but there are a variety of ministries that are gospel-honoring ministries of which you've been a part. And hopefully, you're thinking this through. We can't hoard those treasures. We can't bury them. We've got to invest them. The account that we're going to make one day for what God has blessed us with is clearly spelled out in Scripture. You've been listening to the podcast of Marking Ministries, our Help and Hope podcast. And you've been listening also to our good friend Doug MacGray. And we have all of his information on our website. I want to encourage you to go visit that website and spend some time looking at possibly setting up some sort of an appointment with Doug or his staff to talk these things through. I know I'm going to, because as I said at the beginning, I'm 77 years old. I need to be thinking about this, but not just thinking about it, but acting upon it. Friends, this is Dr. Chuck Betters. You've been visiting with us with our good friend Doug MacGray. May God richly bless you. That's our prayer. Have a great day.